Hey, what's up, here with a Hearthstone video that's a little bit out of my normal wheelhouse, though I do like doing these styles of videos, so maybe I'll do these for future expansions too. This video was inspired by two things, the first one being the fact that people seem to like my little predictions for the teaser that I actually made and explaining some of the lore elements of the game, and the other thing was I saw on Twitter that Ben Hearthstone was trying to make a prediction of who was going to be what suspect for which class. As we know, each individual class will get a suspect and also get one covenant ability. And I figured because Shadowlands is a more recent expansion, there is a less likelihood of people actually paying attention to the overall story and might make some weird assumptions that might not actually be consistent with what is actually known about each of the four covenants, which were the main systems within Shadowlands and where most of these characters originate from. The first thing we have to go over is the fact that there are four covenants: the Kyrian, the Necrolords, the Night Fae, and the Venthyr. While there are many afterlives in the Warcraft story, these four were actually central to the overall story of Shadowlands and to the fundamental balance of the Shadowlands overall. The Kyrians were tasked with bringing in souls into the Shadowlands once people had actually passed, and they are the ones that are the most devout and purest of soul. The Necrolords were mighty warriors and tacticians who were in task of actually protecting the Shadowlands from the other planes of existence. The Night Fae were there for the nature-based entities in the Warcraft story, and Venthyr were finally there to try to redeem those souls who had redeemable features and were created by Sire Denathrius and make their home in Revendreth, which is the main place that we're actually going to be visiting within the Murder at Castle Nathria set. We know from a interview that was actually done that each individual class is going to be getting a suspect, and we have seen one of those suspects so far, which is Baroness Vash, who is the Shaman legendary minion for this set. And we also did see her covenant ability, which was Primordial Wave, which is actually pretty closely related to the Primordial Wave in the World of Warcraft game. But instead of healing allies and doing damage to enemies, it is devolving enemies and evolving friendly minions, which is a cool thing to actually see Evolve Shaman return into Hearthstone. But if we use this as a basis for all the other suspects, we can make assumptions about which individual classes are going to get which covenant abilities, given the fact that most of these characters on this background is actually a Warcraft character already and not a Hearthstone original. So the other one that we actually saw some information about is Decimator Ogra, which I forgot to mention in the other video. She is actually Mankirk's wife, but since this is the afterlife, she has already died, and this is her being a warrior within the afterlife of Maldraxxus and protecting the Shadowlands. I'm interested in seeing if we do see some interaction between the two characters, just because they are related. But you never know. It really just depends what they want to do. And this is something that not a lot of people actually picked up on, because we can actually see the armor she's wearing in the background, and it does look like the plate armor set for Necrolords. I'm assuming she's going to be a Necrolord character, and that actually makes a lot of sense given the fact that it seems her theme is going to be fitting a enraged warrior theme, which is something that Blizzard has been trying to push a little bit with some of the other cards that have been brought back into standard, such as Bloodhoof Brave. The other thing about this is the covenant ability that is for Necrolords for warriors in World of Warcraft is called Conqueror's Banner, which increases the mastery and movement speed of friendly allies. We have seen the covenant ability, the location, and the suspect for Shaman. I'm going to assume that all three for each individual class are going to always be related to each other, and the fact that we've seen Warrior's location and suspect already, I'm going to assume that Conqueror's Banner either increases the attack and HP of damaged minions or give damaged minions some type of rush. From here, though, we don't really have any information to actually go off of besides what the actual characters are and making educated guesses. The first one is going to be Forgelight Prime Mechanicos, who I'm going to assume is going to be the Paladin suspect for this set. The reason I think this is going to be the case is the fact that Mechanicos is known for making constructs, and because of the fact that Mech Paladin is a really favorable deck right now, this fits perfectly for Paladin, especially given the fact that one of the more iconic Covenant abilities is also for Kyrians for Paladin, which is Divine Toll, which casts Holy Shock, Avenger's Shield, or Judgment on to up to 5 targets, and this means it either heals allies or actually does damage to the opponent. For a ability that I'm assuming that might be the case for Divine Toll is maybe some type of AoE heal for friendly minions and some type of AoE damage for upper enemies. Something that would be a little bit more interesting would be something similar to Holy Wrath from Days Gone, where you drew a card and did damage equal to its cost, but I don't know if they would want to repeat a card like that if it doesn't draw multiple cards, or if they wanted to swap the value from being cost to maybe HP or attack. You never know. The other thing that needs to be mentioned here, though, is the fact that Ragnaros Lightlord actually went back into rotation, which means I would almost want to assume we will see some type of heal paladin maybe get a lot of support in this set or the next set, and that might be what Divine Toll is some type of win condition for heal paladin, maybe increased damage for the amount of healing that you've done throughout the game or something similar to that. You never know. There's a lot of things they possibly could do with Divine Toll, but at the same time, I think the safest bet would maybe be something related to heal paladin. Now, for the next suspect is Draka. Draka is actually Thrall's mother, and of course she is dead in the Warcraft story, and she is related to the Maldraxxus storyline and one of the key figures in that storyline. My prediction for her and which class she's actually going to fit is Hunter. The reason behind this is because in World of Warcraft she is actually wearing the male Necrolord set as seen in these two screenshots, the one on the right being a random orc character that you can just have yourself, and the one on the left actually being Draka within the game. I know that it doesn't really make sense for a hunter to be dual wielding weapons, but we also do have Rexxar as the key lore character for hunter in Hearthstone, even though he normally stereotypically uses 2 axes instead of a bow and arrow. Besides the armor, the other reason I think she'll be going to hunter instead of any other class is the fact that she is a frost wolf, or at least she was a frost wolf while she was alive, and those are the orc tribe that stereotypically have a really good relationship with wolves, as seen in the artwork of Drekthar, and the fact that in Maldraxxus she actually does have a wolf mount that she actually does ride around on. And for the ability that is actually the Necrolord ability for hunters in the game, it's Death Chakram, which bounces around and does damage to 7 targets, which makes me think it's going to be very similar to a old warrior spell, Bouncing Blade, but instead of bouncing around until something dies, maybe bounce 7 times, and if it hits any allies it increases their attack, but if it hits opponent minions it does X amount of damage, which would actually fit the theme of increasing the damage of both yourself and your pet from the original Death Chakram spell within World of Warcraft. Now, for the next suspect, I don't know for a fact if this is actually going to be the character, but I went around in Ardenweald, which is the home of the Night Fae, to try to find a character that actually matches next character, which I think is going to be Ceciline for Druid. She is a Aryan, which are a type of Druid people within the afterlife and the caretakers of Ardenweald itself, and because it makes a lot of sense that this would be the Druid suspect, I'm assuming that Druid is going to be getting Convoke the Spirits as their Covenant ability within the game. The logic behind this guess, besides her just appearance, is the fact that Convoke the Spirit is actually the most iconic Covenant ability for Druids overall in WoW right now, as it is the ability that most of them picked at the start of the expansion and used for a great chunk of the expansion. It also fits the theme of a Druid really, really well, and honestly, when it comes to abilities, if it follows the World of Warcraft ability, then it's just going to be similar to Rune of the Archmage, where it just casts a bunch of random spells for X amount of mana. Though, if it isn't something like that, I could see it maybe doing something with Choose One, as Fangbolt Staghelm actually came back into rotation too, and I would assume that some of the core set is actually previews to what is to come for certain classes. And since Fangirl hasn't really seen too much new support in the recent set since his rotation in, this might be a really great location to try to start doing that. Now for the next character, it's Kel'Thuzad, which doesn't actually fit any of the covenants as he is related to the Maw, aka Super Hell, in the Warcraft universe, where all the souls that have no redeeming qualities actually just go, or if you are paying attention to the Shadowlands story at the beginning of the expansion, where all souls just go because the Arbiter is actually broken. Though Kel'Thuzad does actually appear in 2 of the Covenant campaigns, the first one being the Necrolords and the other one being Venthyr. For the Necrolords, the Mage ability is Deathborn, which turns your basic spells for each individual spec into basically cleave damage. It's one that is kind of difficult to try to translate directly into Hearthstone, but it could be a cheap spell that makes all your other spells for the rest of the turn cleave other additional targets. And the other spell, which I think is probably going to be what they will use, Mirrors of Torment, makes it where whenever the target that you use it on does something, it actually reflects some type of damage back to them. The reason why I think Mirrors of Torment will be the one that actually is going to be translated into Hearthstone over Deathborn is the fact that Deathborn is a little bit harder to translate directly into the game, and Mirrors of Torment does suggest that there would be an interesting new type of mage deck to actually play around with. And in the interview that was given by 2 of the Hearthstone devs after the set was revealed, they said that Mage was going to have a really fun deck to actually look forward to that is centered around a legendary and their Covenant ability. And I think doing something where it forces your opponent to get rid of some mirror images on the board, or it actually just reflects it back to their face or does something similar to that, would be actually a really cool way to maybe try to do a unique deck for Mage overall, as Mage right now is either Naga or Mech Mage, and seeing a spell-based Mage deck would maybe be cool to see again. Though there are 2 other possibilities that aren't actually related to either of the Covenant abilities. Maybe they will actually make a Maw Covenant ability just for Kel'Thuzad, since he is connected to the Maw, but I very much doubt it. And if they did, I'm assuming it would maybe be something related to Freeze Mage or Heritage Mage, because Agwyn actually stayed into rotation after the new core set was revealed, and there hasn't really been any support for that card. But at the same time, Freeze Mage has been seeing a lot of new support, and Kel'Thuzad is notorious for having a lot of frost-based abilities. Now time for Artificer Zymox, who is actually one of my favorite characters from WoW currently in Shadowlands. He is a broker, which is very similar to the Ethereals, except they deal in the afterlife, but they do go to individual different planes to bring things back into the afterlife and then sell them at auctions, or look for powerful artifacts to power themselves up. Artificer was actually a big ally to Sire Denathrius in the Castle Nathria raid within WoW, and was actually one of the bosses within it. During the fight, he actually uses a artifact that is related to Maldraxxus, and he also uses one related to Ardenweald, and he also uses one related to the Maw. But he doesn't actually die there. He actually goes into the last raid of this same expansion, where he is trying to decipher a artifact from the first one, which are the creators of the Warcraft universe as it currently stands. Which this means it's kind of hard to actually pinpoint which covenant he's actually going to fit in, but because he was such a powerful ally of the Sire, I'm going to assume, given the fact that we have already seen Door of Shadows, which was one of the generic abilities that each covenant had, and this is the generic one for Venthyr, that he is actually going to be allied with the Venthyrs. And for the Venthyr ability for Rogue, it's called Flagration, which does increase damage for each combo point you actually spend within X amount of seconds, which makes me think this is going to be related to some type of combo Rogue, or each combo card you actually played throughout the game. Though my other prediction would be maybe similar to the old Edwin, but instead of getting an additional HP and attack, you would just get additional damage on this spell, and you would want to play it on a turn where you actually play a lot of spells. Or a random thought that I just had, maybe something to do with Coin Rogue, especially given the fact that Tomb Pillager actually rotated back in with the new standard set, and that is kind of weird to actually see a card like this come back for no reason besides the fact that it just exists. There are also the Shark that gives you coins, and there's also the Mailbox Dancer that also gives coins there. There's a lot of possibilities with something like that, but that could also feed back into the idea of increased damage per spell that you've actually cast during a given turn. And now for one of the Hearthstone original characters, Rafalm. Rafalm is probably going to be the Warlock suspect, mainly given the fact that historically speaking, most of his cards have all been related to Warlocks, and I'd be very shocked if we did not see him related to Warlock. Though, given the breakdown of how many covenants that we do kind of basically have confirmed per grouping, Venthyr is probably going to be the one that I'd assume would actually be the home for Rafalm, which makes a lot of sense. The cards that we've seen, historically speaking, for Rafalm have been Curse of Rafalm, Archvillain Rafalm, both of which have different abilities and different decks that they actually support, but the first one being support for Curse Warlock, and I'm assuming that Curse Warlock is going to be an archetype that they're going to keep trying to push in each individual set. And what wouldn't be a better boss monster than one of the original reasons why we had a curse in the game in the first place. We also did see Supreme Archaeology from him, which means we could maybe see some type of combo draw out of Rafalm from this. And the fact that we've also seen Discard Warlock weirdly supported again for some apparent reason in the core set might mean it will be pushed in that direction. But when it comes to abilities overall, I would assume it's probably going to be the Venthyr ability, which is Impending Catastrophe, which does damage to a target and everything in its path, while leaving a Curse of Weakness or a Curse of Tongues on them and doing dot damage over time to all nearby enemies. Honestly, this fits perfectly for Curse Warlock, which is the reason why I would assume that it's probably going to be the Covenant for Warlock in the end, as it would make a lot of sense to try to make a more balanced arrangement of each individual covenants being represented here, and does fit thematically well with a lot of the other Rafalm cards we've seen in the past. And now for a big character for the Shadowlands overarching story, which kind of tells you where this expansion is supposed to be set in when it comes to the timeline of events, if it is canon to the Warcraft story as a whole, which is Pelagos, who is actually the first transgender character within the Warcraft story as a whole, and he serves as a carrion within the story, where we're actually trying to get him able to actually accomplish each of the trials set so he can actually ascend into being a full-blooded carrion. This isn't the reason why Pelagos is a very important character to the Shadowlands story. After the events of Sanctum of Damnation, which is the second raid within the Shadowlands expansion, we find out that we need to replace the Arbiter, who is the person who actually chooses where each individual soul actually goes, and Pelagos actually ascends to become the new Arbiter at the end of the expansion. Seen in the picture right behind me, where you can see his ascended form, because before his ascension he actually was a carrion, I'm going to assume Boon of the Ascended is actually going to be the ability that Priest actually gets as a spell within Hearthstone. And given the fact that we also did see Lyra the Sun Shard go back into rotation, I almost want to assume this is going to support a combo style of Priest deck where you do a bunch of damage using something like Boon of Ascendance, which actually goes between increase in damage and an increase in healing depending on the number of allies and enemies actually hit by the ability. Or if we're going to be even wilder, maybe something that actually replaces the hero power of Priest as a whole, similar to what old Shadow form actually did, and maybe does some type of AoE board clear to your opponent's board and then swaps to a AoE heal for your board. Now for the final subject, which I don't actually know who this character is supposed to be. I know there are theories that he's actually Arlon Slyvan, who was part of the Ardenweald cinematic at the start of the Shadowlands expansion where he actually does die, but I don't know if this character actually fits the role of Demon Hunter in any ways, because by the time we actually do go to Ardenweald, he is already dead. But it does look like the character is probably a Sylvian, which means it's probably going to be a Ardenweald based Covenant ability, and the Demon Hunter Covenant ability for Ardenweald is the Hunt. Hunt is an ability that actually does damage to a target and then does damage to everything in between the target and you when you actually use it, while also rooting them in place. Which makes me wonder if this is going to be a spell that targets your opponent's hero and does damage to their minions that are in between you and a direct line to the enemy hero. Alright, so those were all the suspects and the ones that I actually think each individual class is going to get as their covenants. Let me know down below what your theories are of which covenants are going to go to which class, and what characters you think some of these are, if I got any of them wrong, or if you have some other fan theories about who the final Demon Hunter character is, or even the character that I have labeled as Druid. Like always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, bye bye.